Welcome, welcome. Dr. Stephen Hobbs here from the Wellth Movement. This is Perspective Thursday. It's a video that I share with you a perspective on some element of what's happening within the Wellth movement, and it's shot on a Thursday, thus Perspective Thursday. Now, it's kind of interesting is that I live a life where I'm what's called a gray digital nomad. I actually sold my home about, I think it was about 7 years ago, and I gave everything that I owned away, kept the basics. And what I do is I house sit, dog sit, cat sit, and also travel and see different parts of the world, take different work assignments and see what unfolds. 2020 was an interesting year, as we know, and I found myself still doing some house sitting and supporting other people's homes, and I find myself again in an emergency situation, and thus a little bit different background than I've been using before. And I just wanted to share that with you, is because you might be asking, well, where is he now, or what's going on? And that's what's taking place. So today's topic is about 10 educating approaches. I wanted to share a perspective, and it comes about because of the book that I wrote back in 2013, which actually I started back in about 2010, finished it up in 2013, which is called Help Them Help You Manage Lead. It has a bit of a workplace lean. However, I believe it is of value still. But what I'm doing is I'm actually updating this book because I covered 9 educating approaches in this book. I've now have written it up as 10. So I'm going through the edits and getting the book ready for republishing. Now, having said that, again, I would remind you to subscribe, ring the bell, and to comment, like, and share. I enjoy learning from you, and that's one of the ways in which to do it. As we dive into today, I just wanted to share a short sort of summary story about my life as an educator, because it links back to a phrase that you'll hear me share quite often, which is when you listen, you learn, where you share, you educate. And I'm going to look at the word educate here and lean it towards a share. I will, in the near future, might even be the next video, I'll do one on listening and learning. Now, this notion of educating in my life has certainly been there since probably, I don't know, grade 6, grade 7, certainly popped out more in my grade 8 years when I got involved in youth leadership programs. And then it progressed and progressed and progressed. But where I'm going to pick up the story is in the late 80s, where I was working in Uganda. And one of my jobs was to do health education. It was around HIV and AIDS at that point in time. And I remember one time ending up in the school, and I looked up, and it was during the day, and I looked up and I could see the sky. All right. And then I was there at night giving another presentation. I looked up again and I could see the stars. So you can probably appreciate there was really no roof to this school. Now, that was part of the story, but there was another element here that I thought was that sort of tickled my fancy and reminded me about the importance of educator and being aware of where you are at the time when you educate. And it was, I was getting up in the afternoon to make my presentation, and a young person came and stood beside me. And I sort of, what's going on here? And I leaned over and I said, why are you standing here? And the person said, well, I'm your interpreter. I forgot that I was in a rural village of the country, and English is not necessarily spoken. It's more of a local language. And it was just sort of reminded me, and it was sort of like a glaring reminder, like that neon sign that's flying in your face, flickering in your face. And I went, oh, right, okay. And so I've carried that story with me over the years. And I've also had the pleasure of educating in different parts of the world. And another time I ended up on an old cruise ship that they had refitted as a hotel. And we actually ended up making a presentation through crossing up of bookings. We ended up making a presentation in the bar area of this old cruise ship. Now you have to appreciate this, is that I'm 6'7", and the ceilings in that cruise ship were about 6'5", and hanging out of the roof was the water sprinklers if there was a fire. So I'm standing there with a slight sort of bend to my head, and I'm ducking and weaving underneath these sprinkler heads. And I found out at the end is that the students had made a bet, is would I actually hit a sprinkler head? I thought that was great. And by the way, I didn't. I'm pretty good at sensing where I am and door height, door frame heights and all that. I've got that sorted out in my life. So I just wanted to share is that I've had lots of really interesting times and places to educate. And certainly here in my neck of the woods, Canada, the United States, where I've done quite a bit of work as well, is that I came to really start to understand these different educating approaches, which is where I want to go now. But part of it was also framed because I spent time as a college instructor and university professor. And through those, I started to really think about what are the different educating approaches that are available. So what I'm going to do is go over the 10 of those, and I'm going to share a little bit about each one. And then what I'm going to do is open up a slide and show you how they all integrate with one another. And the story of integration actually comes from the perspective of weaver. And the weaver is, you can appreciate, bringing all the threads together. It's the person who says, okay, how does A and B and C and X and Y and 1 and 2 and all that, how do they all come together into some kind of coherent whole? And so I associate Weaver with this holistic perspective. And I remember watching a video, and it was about appreciative inquiry. And in there, the photographer DeWitt Jones, who is a National Geographic photographer, had stopped in Scotland and was having a chat with a weaver there, an actual weaver of cloth. And this is why it came to mind, is the importance of the notion of the weaver. He says, what is it that's important to you? And she says, when you weave, you weave. And it struck me as I went, does that mean when you lead, you lead? When you manage? When you educate, you educate? When you learn, you learn? And it came as a part of me, is that whatever it is that you might be doing, and there's a name given to it, don't confuse those names and use things in cross purposes. So when I hear someone talk about, well, I'm an educator, then one of the first questions I ask is, share a little bit more about the approach that you use so I can get a sense of it, thus the presentation today. Because there's lots of ways in which we learn. And when someone says, well, I'm a learner at the moment, I said, well, what's your preferred way of learning? So I might be able to connect with you in that way. And this is why, if I understand the different educating approaches, then I can match it up with the learning of the learners who are before me. And that has helped me a great deal in terms of using what I call evidence-based learning and experience-based educating. And I've developed an approach that I use in all the different ways in which I do my educating. And therefore, this notion of the weaver is one in which I'm just always reminded of this holistic approach, what I might call the whole systems, whole person approach. So the next one I'd like to share with you is the one called Celebrant. Now the Celebrant, I used to call it in my book, this was the minstrel. A minstrel was a person who went from court to court, sharing the news of the day, more than a juggler, more than a jester. It was someone who was celebrating what was going on in the community, in the country, and bringing it from community to community. And so I thought minstrel was a really great way being able to share that story. And then I've come to understand that it's more maybe from a celebrant point of view, celebrating what is taking place, is to start looking at different ways in which to say yay or nay to what's unfolding in front of you, and to be able to celebrate it, to appreciate it, to become enthusiastic around it. And it was just a way in which to capture this approach that allowed me to just say, I get it. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to spend some time with you, just bringing the stories together. And then I might bring another celebrative story together. And then those two are what I weave together. So weaving the threads as I celebrate and create those threads. So that's a way of looking at it. The next one that I wanted to share with you is the notion of mentor. And mentor is a person who's in a trusted relationship with you. And what they're doing is they're answering your questions. So in this case, the mentee is asking questions of the mentor to tap into the lived experience of the mentor. And it's very much from a place of evolvement. And I'll make a distinction here in a second. This notion of evolving, to be able to love your mystery, love your history, and lo and behold, be present. The mentor offers that to you because you're tapping into their lived experience. And then eventually it finds a way of balancing off, is that if you're truly a mentor, there's so much you can learn from your mentee. The next one I want to look at is the coach. And the coach is really about having performance taken care of. In other words, you're going to ask questions of what I'll call the coachee, and it's to do it from a performance point of view, to fulfill your accountabilities. I liken it more to involvement. If mentor is about evolvement, coaching is about involvement, to get whatever it is that you've agreed to do, to fulfill your commitments, and you need some assistance, then a coach is very helpful to you at that point in time. Shifter. Shifter is really from a place of making some decisions, life decisions about what am I going to be doing next. Very much like in a workplace, as an example, is a career shift. Now, there are other times in our lives when I might make a shift from being a single man to being married to being a husband. There are shifts that take place. And often it's great to understand those shifts and to be able to learn about them. And therefore, you can help other people with how they shift. And it's just a little bit more of a specific component to the notion of mentor coach, is getting into being a shifter. Then there's the notion of counselor. And with a counselor is that you're finding yourself in connection with someone from a caring point of view. Something is happening in their life and they need some support. And you can do that through a counselor approach. Now, what's kind of sort of connecting all of these together is a mentor. There is certification for a mentor, but it's not mandatory. There's coach with certification. They lean a bit more to, it's a good idea to have your coaching certification. Shifter, there are special connections or awards that you can get in the human resources area of the world. But Counselor, you do have to get specialized training to be able to do that. And that could lean towards like psychologist, counselor, and to be able to unfold that approach of caring with someone. The next four that I'd like to go over is starting with facilitator. Now, facilitator is someone who usually works with a group, drawing ideas from the group in answer to a question or a task. And I'm going to make the distinction between the facilitator and the other three with the four that I've just done in terms of mentor, coach, shifter, and counselor. They tend to be one-to-one, whereas the ones I'm going to share now tend to be one-to-many. So the facilitator is drawing ideas from the group in response to a question, the task that's been put before you. And it's very important to know how to become a facilitator and the tools and techniques that you use, because you got multiple people involved. There's actually a specialized kind of facilitator that is developing. It's called the visual facilitator. It's someone who actually can draw out what the comments, the ideas are being shared. I have done that a couple of times myself, and in conferences, I stood to the side, and as I listened to the presentations, I drew what I was hearing, and it made it really great. And it was a 3-day conference I went, and I developed it so it looked like 3 scrolls on the wall, and I drew, and there's enough paper that I could keep adjusting. So when it was done, I unraveled it, and these scrolls came out off the wall onto the ground, and people would come over and read what was taking place. I thought it was fabulous. I got some great comments, and I did get a few head scratches as well. The next thing that you would take a look at is the instructor. Now, I've done lots of first aid instructing over the time, and really what makes it distinguishable is you are explaining and describing the deeper why behind what you are learning. And I make that in comparison to the trainer, and the trainer is providing insight about a specific skill you're to use now. You get training on the use of that equipment. You get training in how to write an email, versus you might go to a course and get instruction about why you're learning that. And that's just a distinction between the two of them. The last one that I would bring on board here is the world of consultant. And the consultant has some specialized ideas that they want to exchange with the group. And what they're doing is bringing those special ideas after having done a little bit of research to find out what is needed. So sometimes you can actually have the consultant blends up with the facilitator. And to be able to bring ideas to the foreground, you need to know what the group needs at that point. Now, these 10 educating approaches that I'm sharing with you come from my lived experience and all these different examples and times that I have been an educator in lots of different kinds of situations. And I appreciate someone might say, well, can't you facilitate a person rather than a group? Yes. Can you do counseling rather than one-to-one? You might do it in a group. Yes. It's not that I'm attempting to share what is absolute about educating approaches, as much as to bring awareness to that these approaches are available for your use. And as you understand them, when you facilitate, you facilitate. When you counsel, you counsel. When you mentor, you mentor. And if you're going to shift the educating approach, my suggestion is then you acknowledge that you're shifting it. Let me give an example of that. I've gone to a meeting where it was said that we were going to be in a facilitative session. In other words, I'm expecting to walk in and someone's going to facilitate, ask a question, draw ideas up. The person arrived and proceeded to instruct us in what we needed to know, not asking us about what did we know. And it struck me at that point in time, this is one of those learning experiences that sort of brought the 10 approaches to me. And I went, well, what happens when I go to the next meeting that's labeled facilitative meeting? And this happens again, I get instructed. I know what'll probably start to take place is that I will not even participate because I won't come prepared if it's a facilitated meeting, thinking, okay, I'm going to get instructed again today, which is unfortunate because if you're going to instruct, instruct. If you're going to facilitate, facilitate. If you're going to move from facilitate to instruct or instruct to facilitate, then declare that shift in your educating approach. And that is something that I would always bring to your attention, the importance of that. Now, what I'm going to do is I would like to bring to you how these educating approaches come together. Now, one of the things that you'll remember if you've seen any of my other videos is the use of this arrow, what's called the perspective arrow, or the path of learning and educating. So today we're talking about the educating component of it. So you probably gathered that there are the 4 here and the 4 here and Celebrant and Weaver. And I want to just make a connection here for you, and it links to M and L, and you might know what they are already. But here's something that I think is important. If I was to bring the notion of instructor, consultant, trainer together, I might call that teach on the reach. Is that what I'm doing is that I am providing insights, usually to a group, okay, to help them understand what it is that will improve what they are doing, to focus them, to strengthen them using these techniques. And therefore, you might gather is that there is this notion of coach, shifter, and counselor, and more from working one-to-one, is that these are techniques that are like a guide on the ride. So the person's headed somewhere and you're going to be a guide on that ride. And that said to me, okay, that's great, but what might happen if I took a look at those 3? And this is where I came up with sage off the page, because there is something about lived experience here. When you facilitate a group, a depth of lived experience in the tools and techniques there. Mentor is to be able to answer the questions of the mentee. The celebrant, to be able to show how celebration and enthusiasm and all that comes together, to be able to share the news, is starting to bring ideas together, which then left me with the notion of the weaver, because the weaver, in a sense, is bringing all of them together, whole systems, whole person perspective. So you might go, okay, there's a thread, there's a thread, there's a thread. So there are 3 threads that the weaver brings together. That's one way of looking at it. You might find that I'm going to be a facilitative mentor, which happens to be the way that I prefer to interact with people who are wanting to tap into what it is that I've learned over the years. I'm much better as a facilitator mentor than I am as an instructive coach. But I could choose, okay, I'm going to be a facilitator, a mentor, and a celebrant, and weave those 3 together in terms of using my educating approaches. So you can appreciate there's a lot of ways in which to make this happen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to liken it to the fact that The facilitator, instructor, trainer, consultant is what I call manage. It's a way of looking at it. Manage the systems for persons. In other words, when you go to facilitate, instruct, train, consult, there are systems there, and you want to make sure that they're working for the persons that you're interacting with. That's why I usually associate them with persons. Whereas on the other side of things, then what I would be doing is looking at lead. And that's to lead a person from system. In other words, I'm going to interact with that person either as a mentor, coach, shifter, or counselor to be able to get them to understand the system that is going to serve them the best at that point in time. And that's why I also liken it to the fact, and this, again, I learned this over time. Manage and lead are like two ends of a stick. And if I pick up one end, in other words, I pick up lead, and I only use mentor, coach, shifter, counselor, I may be missing out on the fact that because I pick up one end, there is the other end: manage, facilitate, instruct, train, consult. Therefore, I want to be able to bring them together and celebrate the dynamics that are there so that what I can do is then learn how to use different combinations so that I have at my fingertips my ability to weave. In other words, pull the different elements together. And over the course of a day, I might use quite a few of these in different kinds of situations. One of the things for me is that I'm very alert that I stay away from the counselor role. That's a person I usually hire in to assist me. If I'm not doing the consulting role and I need new ideas brought in, I might hire a consultant. Like if I need some support in my business, I'll hire a consultant in. If I'm having some questions about my own thinking and feelings, I might invite a form of counselor in. I tend to, with shifter, because again, it's about how to help a person move from one place to another, then I usually have friends who are much better suited at that than I. And through the use of my network, I'll get them to do the educating. The other one is that I've learned is that I'm not necessarily a great trainer either in terms of sharing a particular skill with someone. Sometimes, and it even leans into some of the other ones, is that when I'm training, I get lost in it myself because I tend to make jumps and I forget that a jump that I've made is actually an important step, and I need to slow down. So I don't find myself doing training anymore. I will do instructive coaching because what I'm attempting to do is explain the deeper why and the how, who, and the coach is to guide that person in fulfilling their accountabilities to help them with their involvement. So there's a really great connection there, and I'm okay to do that. Where the trainer, shifter, consultant, and counselor, I tend to hire in or bring my business associates in to do those. And as I mentioned earlier, for me, a facilitative mentor would be a really great way of describing who I am and the educating approach that I use. And over time, I have developed my Celebrant approach and my Weaver approach. And I'll just round out the Celebrant Weaver. Is the Celebrant for me is the creation or the co-creation, even the eco-creation of extraordinary experiences. So the Celebrant is starting to bring these different educating approaches and forming experiences that the learner can be in. And this why the mentor has a mentee and a coach has a coachee, instructor has a learner, facilitator has a group participants. There's names that are associated with it. The Weaver, the Weaver is about creating, co-creating, eco-creating a community of significance. There are communities, there's community of practice, and there's a community of significance. And this whole person, whole systems approach from a weaver brings that community together, that significance. And that's why I use the weaver and celebrant to speak about the bringing together um, the bringing together extraordinary experiences and community of significance. So with that, I would encourage you to subscribe, ring the bell to get notifications, comment, like, share. I'd love to learn what your thoughts are here. You may or may not agree with everything I've shared. Put it down so we can have a conversation. I will be rewriting the book, and I'll make it known to you that it's now available. I've done the first rewrite already. It's just putting it together and getting it ready to put out there for people to read. And I think, in summary, I'll go back to the phrase: when you listen, you learn; where you share, you educate. So when you're educating, you're sharing. And it's one of the best ways to be able to be for the world. And when you understand the nuances of these educating approaches, then what you have at your fingertips are different tools and techniques that you can develop this evidence-based learning, this experience-based educating that draws the learners and draws you into these extraordinary experiences, these communities of significance. And I would offer the following is that while I have a certain learning style and I have a preference for educating approaches, I'm always alert to the fact that not everyone learns the way I learn. Therefore, educating to that, my way of learning, isn't going to be of help. I liken it to the following. Nelson Mandela said something, and I'm adapting it here, is that when you use your words, you touch the learner's head. When you use the words of the learner, you touch the learner's heart. And that was a piece that just fit right into this jigsaw of the 10 educating approaches that I have shared with you. And I encourage you to think through it and maybe even identify which of these you use and find out, do they actually fit the situation? Or you're going to walk into a situation, and how might they fit? Now, I know that my work is grandparents 55 plus years, young, interacting with their legacy story, and then interacting with trees and eco-creation. And how does that bring the Wellth story out? Wellth. And if you're listening in from that perspective as a grandparent of 55 plus years young person, then there's a lot from your lived experience. Just step back into it and figure out which of these educating approaches that you tend to lean into, and ask yourself, do you want to become more efficient, proficient, competent in the other ones? Or might you reach out to some of your friends and family, find out who have these other educating approaches, and maybe there'll be times when you can interact and work together, weave together an approach that would be helpful to the family and to the friends. Now, some of you haven't left the workplace, so the insights that are presented here might be helpful to worksite situations as well. I know, and I truly know this, is that having learned about these 10 educating approaches and having them up my sleeve, so to speak, I can adjust very quickly to a situation and know what it is that I need to work with, to apply into a situation that encourages, celebrates, weaves together this extraordinary experience, this community situation that those that I'm interacting with feel as though they are part of it, and that I feel I'm being for the world and they're learning what it is to be for the world, and we share that. So I encourage you to think through, explore what's here. There will be some other references to material that you may want to do some follow up with. And with that, I encourage you to just enjoy your educating and to be able to share what it is that you know in being for the world. With that, take care.